Let's learn about how we can use LXD to run virtual machines. Using LXD, you could also run containers, but in this video, I will only use it for virtual machines, and inside the virtual machine, we will install Docker. I will talk about that later. And first, let's talk about why I want to recommend using LXD. LXD has a user-friendly interface, and you can use the same interface to run virtual machines and containers. LXD also has an LTS long-term supported version. I also had some problems with LXD. For example, I wanted to move a running virtual machine from one server to another and it didn't work. So until I can figure out what happened, I have to stop the virtual machine on one server, move it to the other server, and then start the virtual machine there. Since I only want to show you how you can build your development environment where you can quickly install new virtual machines, we will not need to move running virtual machines. So let's try to install LXD and see how it works. I also have a blog post about this topic and I will share the link under the video. So you will find some comments here which you can copy and paste, and you will find some explanation too. I will also use it during the video, so let's go to the terminal and try to install LXD. My operating system is the latest Ubuntu LTS. I can also show you. This is it. And this machine is actually a laptop, but I will use it as a server. So I will install LXD here. And to install LXD on Ubuntu, we will need to use snap. Let's see what snap packages I already have. I still don't have LXD. So let's see what versions are available. Snap info LXD. So as you can see, the latest stable version is 5.16. We will install that version. And if you want to choose the LTS version, that was 5.0. So now I want to install the latest version, and I will use sudo snap install LXD. And to choose the version, we will use the channel option and set it to 5.16/stable. Now let's press enter and type the password. And that's it, we have LXD. The next step is that we need to initialize LXD and we need to run LXD init, but please, you don't run it yet. If I run LXD init, it will ask some questions and I usually accept the default answer and just press enter. And it will ask me if I want to create a new storage pool and what storage backend I want to use. I want to use a default ZFS, and yes, I want to create the pool, and it will ask me if I want to add an existing block device, a disk or a partition. And this is exactly what I want to do, because if I don't, then LXD will create a virtual disk in the LXD snap package, which I don't want to. So I will type yes, and it will ask for the path of the device. So let's try to type dev as the A6, which is my partition. And if I press enter, it will start to ask for other configurations. Now it means if I want to use LXD to create the storage pool and the ZFS pool behind it, I can only use one disk. And you can also add multiple disks to the same ZFS pool, and I want to show you how you can do that. So I will just cancel this process and create the ZFS pool manually. There is a problem with the disk name I used before. So if I list my disks, you can see that I have multiple disks and multiple partitions. And sometimes when the server starts, the names of the disks can change. So I have to find a name which will not change. And now I have to go back to my blog post because I have a command which will help me to find the name. an alias, and here it is. So I know I want to use /dev/sda6, but this is the current name. And I will use the find command to find all the aliases which I can use. I can choose any name from this list, for example this one, and add it to my storage pool. If I scroll down, I will also find how I can do that, but before I can start to do that, I need to install ZFS Utils Linux. And now I can set the name of the ZFS pool and use a bash array to set all my disks which I want to add to the pool. And now I can run the following command zpool create to create the pool. Let's see if it was created. Zpool list. I can also run zfs list, and there is only one dataset. Since we have the ZFS pool, we can restart the initialization of LXD. So let's run LXD init again, and now you can do it too. So LXD init, and the first question, we don't want to have a cluster, we want to install one server. So press enter. We want to create and configure a new storage pool, so yes, press enter. We also want to use the default name for the storage pool. The default will be fine, press enter. We want to use the default storage backend, which is ZFS. Let's press enter. And then next, we don't want to create a ZFS pool because we have created that before. So let's type no and press enter. And now we can type the name of the ZFS pool, which was LXD default. The next question is, would you like to connect to the MAAS server, which is Metal as a Service? And we don't have that server yet, so we will not use that. Just press enter. The next question is if we want to create a new local network bridge. Yes, we want to. Press enter. And what should the new bridge be called? The default name will be okay. Use LXDBR0. And we also want to let LXD to configure the network, the subnet automatically. So I will press enter. And I usually don't want to configure an IPv6 subnet when I know I don't need that locally. And I don't want to deal with IPv6 when I want to learn something else. So let's type none and press enter. I also don't want this server to be available from other servers, other machines, so I will just press enter, no. I don't want to update images, so I will type no and then press enter. And since I want to save the generated configuration, here I want to type yes and press enter. Now let's copy this configuration from the screen and save it as LXD init YAML, and I already have this file. And now that we installed LXD and we initialized LXD, we could start to run virtual machines. We still don't want to do that because I want to show you how you can initialize LXD non-interactively. So I will remove LXD and then reinitialize it using the configuration file which we saved before. So first I need to remove LXD using sudo snap remove purge LXD and press enter. I also have to type my password and then snap will remove LXD completely. I can also check if the ZFS pool is still there. I will run ZFS list and it is still there. So then if I want to reinstall LXD, I will try sudo snap install LXD, and again I have to set the channel, which is 516 stable. So I will reinstall LXD. And now I will try to run LXD init, and I need to use the option proceed, and I can redirect the file to the standard input of this command. So I will try that, LXD init. And now we have a problem because we still have the Z pool, the ZFS pool, and it says it wants an empty ZFS pool. So let's remove the ZFS pool, Z pool, delete LXD default. It was actually destroy, not delete, so destroy LXD and using sudo. So now I remove the ZFS pool. I can check it, ZFS list. I have nothing here, so I try to run the previous command again, LXD init, and it still doesn't work because I have to recreate the ZFS pool. And I will just run the previous command, which was zpool create, and I use some variables here. I have my ZFS pool again. So let's run LXD init again, and it finally works. So let's try to use the LXC command, LXC list, and we can now finally start virtual machines. But before we start virtual machines, it is a good idea to see what we already have. So for example, I can also list profiles. We have a default profile. We can also see what this profile contains using LXC profile show default. And that is actually a part of the LXD configuration, which also contain this devices section. And I can also list the networks. This network was one of those networks. So let's run LXC network list. So you can see LXDBR0 here, which was created by LXD. We can also list the storage or storages, and we could list the storage volumes, but we still don't have volumes. And when you want to list the volumes, you also need to set the name of the storage pool. So it's empty. And we can also talk about remotes. I can run LXC remote list, and these are like Docker registries, so we can use these to download virtual machine images or container images. And there is one which is local, which is actually not a remote, but my local server, local LXD server. And I could add a remote LXD server as well. It's time to create our first virtual machine. I will need to copy one command from my blog post, and let's run an Ubuntu Jammy server. It will download the image of the virtual machine and then run it. So it was the easiest way to run a virtual machine, and if I run LXC list, I can see the list of my virtual machines, and I can also see the resources, the amount of memory and CPU inside the virtual machine, so I can use LXC exec Ubuntu Jammy server and try to run the free command. And the problem is, if I do that, then the parameters of the free command will be not the parameters of the free command, but LXC exec, so I will have to use a double dash before the executable command. And now you can see I have about 1 gigabyte of memory, and I will also check the amount of CPU. and it seems I have only one CPU, and I want to change that, so I will use another command. I want to delete this virtual machine, so I will use LXC delete f Ubuntu Jemmy server, and I use -f because I want to force the deletion of this virtual machine because I want to delete a running virtual machine. Okay, it disappeared. And now I can go back to my blog post and run a different virtual machine, and I will change the memory limit to 2 gigabytes, and I will also change the amount of CPUs to use 2 CPUs, which is actually 2 CPU threads, and I will need to increase the size of my root disk. And I forgot to mention, but the default size is only 10 gigabytes. Okay, so I will copy this and try to run this. Now it will be faster. And again, I will try LXC exec, Ubuntu Jemmy server, --, and a free command, about 2 gigabytes, and let's see the CPUs. And now I have 2 CPUs here. You can see the indexes of the CPUs. Let's check the size of the disk. It is 20 gigabytes. And I also want to show you something else, so I will remove the virtual machine which I created. Let's delete LXC delete force Ubuntu Jemmy server. So you can use --force or just -f to force the deletion of a virtual machine, of a running virtual machine. And I will find a command which I can use to run the virtual machine again. Here, if I'm quick enough and try to run an LXC exec command again, then it will say LXDVM is not running. If I run the LXC list command quick enough, you will not see any IP address here. But if you run it again and you see an IP address, then probably LXD agent is running. So let's try again. It is running. So this is what happens when you try to run LXC commands too quickly and the agent in the virtual machine is still not running. So I have only one virtual machine, and if I try to check the resources again, you can see that I have about 2 gigabytes of memory inside the VM, and if I run the command on my host, you can see how much memory I have on the host. Now let's say I want to add more memory to my virtual machines than I actually have. So let's run one more virtual machine, which will have a different name, of course. I will use Ubuntu Jemmy Server 2, and I want to use not just 2 gigabytes of memory, but I want to use 15 gigabytes of memory. So one virtual machine will use 16 gigabytes and the other will use 2 gigabytes, which is 17 gigabytes. And if I try to run this, it will start. You can see it is starting. We can also check the console, LXC console, Ubuntu, Jemmy, server 2. It is booting. We have the server, and if you want to exit this console, you can press Ctrl plus A and then Q. You can find this in the blog post as well. Now, we have 2 virtual machines, but the problem is that they use more memory than we actually have. So if you want to avoid that, you can use some scripts to check how much resources you already assigned to the virtual machines. So again, I will go back to my blog post and copy some scripts here. I have two ways to check the resources that I assign to the virtual machines. Let's try this. And now, as I told you, it showed me how much resources I assign to the virtual machine, but this is more than I have. I can also do it with the CPU. And I can also do it with the disks. These scripts work only because I changed the instance configuration. So if I try to create a new virtual machine using the same Ubuntu version, let's call it Ubuntu test, it will still use one CPU and 1 GB of memory. And if I want to copy the scripts to see how much memory I assign to my virtual machines, and if I run it, I will get an error message because I have one virtual machine which does not have memory limit. And we usually don't want to change the instance configuration when we can use profiles. So let's learn about profiles. I will go back to my blog post and I will try to create a profile which will help me to install Docker and also add an extra disk, an extra volume to the virtual machine. And first I have to create the volume. So I will use my script to set the name of the storage pool, which is default, the only storage pool I have. And I will also set the name of the volume. And then I will set the size. And finally, I can run the command using these variables. So let's create the storage volume as a block device, and it has a pool name, a volume name, and the size. Done. We can also list the storage volumes. Volume list in the default pool. The next, I want to create another volume for the second virtual machine. And the only thing I need to change here is the name of the volume. And I can run the previous command again, which will create the second volume. And it's time to create the profile. First, we will create an empty profile and then edit it. So LXC profile create Docker host. Docker host is the name of the profile. If I create this and list the profiles, you can see here, and I can also see the content of this new profile, which is basically empty. And now we have to edit it, and we could edit it like LXC profile, edit, and Docker host, but I don't want to edit it interactively. I want to do it the same way I initialized LXD non-interactively. I will create a file called LXD profile Docker host YAML, and I think I already have this file, but let's check it. Yes, I already have this. You can just copy this content, the whole profile here, into that file. And then if you have the file, you can run LXC profile edit Docker host and redirect the content of that file into the standard input of the edit command. LXC profile edit Docker host LXD profile Docker host YAML. Let's check the profile again. Now it's not empty anymore. We still have some virtual machines here, and I want to delete all of them. so we can create new virtual machines only to run Docker inside. I will edit the LXD profile, Docker host profile, or at least I will show you this file. And the first setting is boot auto start, which means when we start our server and LXD starts, it will also start the virtual machine. I don't want that because sometimes when I start my server, my laptop, I don't want to run LXD virtual machines. I only want to test something else. And the second configuration is the CPU limit, so I don't have to use the config option when I run the LXC launch command, and I also can set the memory limit here. And then I will use cloud-init to add a default user called manager, and I will run some command to configure the disk of Docker and also install Docker itself. And here down you can see the devices, and this is how I can change the size of the default disk, the default root disk. We will also have a custom disk called Docker Data Root, and I know that I want to have it in the default pool. I know I want to have it as a block device, a disk, and I don't know what the name will be because I have multiple volumes and I can't set it in the profile. If you want to know more about this configuration, you can find more details in the blog post, but I still want to show you something, and this is how I set the password hash for the user. So I can use OpenSSL, and I can also choose an algorithm, and it will ask for the password. Now you can verify it and have the password hash. And you can copy this and use it in the profile. And now we can start our virtual machines. So I will copy my next command, which will create docker 01 using the default profile and the Docker host profile. And it will also override the name of the volume for the Docker data root. Let's try this. It will create the virtual machine. And I want to do the same with the second virtual machine. I need to change the name of the virtual machine and the name of the volume. And now we have two virtual machines, and the first already has an IP address and the second has an IP address too. Now we can also use LXC console to see what is happening inside the virtual machine. Now you can see that cloud-init installs Docker, and at the end you can press enter to get the prompt and use the username manager. And now the password is password, and you can use sudo docker info. It works. Now I want to exit, and I'm still in the console, so I have to press Ctrl plus A and then Q. So we have two virtual machines, and both of these virtual machines have Docker in the VM. And now I can use xcexec docker 01, and I can use Docker this way too. Now let's see the disk. As you can see, the SDB is mounted at /var/lib/docker, so Docker is using our extra disk, extra volume. And if I run ZFS list, you can also see our new virtual machines here. And this is how you can create your virtual machines using LXD. And you can also use cloud-init to install Docker or anything you want to have inside the virtual machine. And if you go back to the blog post, at the end, you will also find some useful information about the official LXD UI, which is a web interface for managing LXD. This is how you can configure LXD manually, but sometimes you want to do it automatically. And if that's the case, then you probably want to use something like Ansible, which I talk about in another video series, how to create your home lab. And if you want to know more about that, just check the description under the video.